Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Shadows in the Frame. Todd Whitney stood in his home office, surrounded by the blueprints and photographs that defined 30 years of his career. At 53, he'd built a reputation as one of Chicago's most respected investigative journalists, the man who'd brought down corrupt politicians, exposed pharmaceutical scandals, and documented organized crime with fearless precision. The Pulitzer on his shelf wasn't just decoration. It was a reminder that truth, however dangerous, was worth pursuing. But lately, truth had become slippery in his own home. "Dad, you're going to love this." Kenny Whitney, his 28-year-old son from his first marriage, climbed down from the ladder in the living room. His hands were dusty from installing the small, nearly invisible cameras in the corners of each room. State-of-the-art motion detection, night vision, the whole package. Links straight to my phone and yours. Todd crossed his arms, skeptical. "Ken, I've lived in this house for 4 years without cameras. What's changed?" Kenny's expression shifted, something unreadable flickering across his face. At 6'2", with his mother's sharp features and Todd's determined jaw, he'd inherited both their stubbornness. "Just humor me, okay? You're not exactly Mr. Popular with certain people after that last expose on the Marchetti family." The Marchetti piece. 6 months ago, Todd had published a 3-part investigation into the Chicago crime syndicate that had operated in the shadows for decades. Vincent Marchetti, the aging patriarch, had sworn vengeance from the courthouse steps. But Todd had received threats before. It came with the territory. "The Marchettis are finished," Todd said, though his voice carried less certainty than his words. "Vincent's in prison. His sons are scattered." "Are they?" Kenny secured the last camera above the fireplace. "Dad, just, please, for me, for Sarah." Sarah, Todd's daughter, Kenny's younger sister by 2 years. She lived in Boston now, a pediatric surgeon with her own family, but she called every week. Both his children had inherited his protective instincts, apparently directed at him now. "Fine," Todd exhaled. "But I'm not spending my retirement jumping at shadows." Kenny smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're only retired from the paper, Dad. You'll never retire from being nosy." He wasn't wrong. Even now, Todd was working on a book, a comprehensive history of organized crime in Chicago, drawing from his decades of investigation. His home office was filled with files, recordings, photographs dating back to his earliest days as a crime reporter. Some of that evidence had never been published, too dangerous or too legally precarious, but it was all there, documented with the meticulous care that had defined his career. "How's Christy handling all this?" Kenny asked, packing up his tools. The question carried weight, layers of concern that Todd chose to ignore. Christy Maloney Whitney, his wife of 18 months. 38 years old, sharp-featured and sharper-tongued. She'd been a publicist at the newspaper when they'd met 3 years ago. After his divorce from Eleanor, Kenny and Sarah's mother, had been finalized a decade earlier, Todd had been cautiously single. Then Christy had walked into his life with her efficient smile and her understanding of his world. Or so he'd thought. "She's fine," Todd said, working late on some new client campaign. "You know how PR is." Kenny nodded, his jaw tight. He'd never warmed to Christy, none too subtly suggesting the marriage had been rushed, but Todd had dismissed it as the natural skepticism of children watching their parent remarry. After Kenny left, Todd toured his house with new awareness of the cameras perched in every room: living room, kitchen, hallways, his office, even the master bedroom. Kenny had been thorough. The devices were so small they were nearly invisible, blending into crown molding and ceiling corners. Todd's phone buzzed, a text from Kenny. "All cameras are live. You can check the app anytime. I'm monitoring too. Stay safe, Dad." He typed back a quick thanks and pocketed the phone. The house felt different now, watched, protected or surveilled. He wasn't sure which. That night, Christy came home near midnight. Todd was still awake, reviewing chapters of his manuscript in bed. She slipped in quietly, her designer heels clicking softly on hardwood, before she removed them. "You're up late," she said, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that had first attracted him. "Book's not going to write itself." He looked up from his laptop. "How was the client meeting?" "Exhausting." She disappeared into the bathroom, and he heard water running. When she emerged in her silk robe, her auburn hair down, she looked perfect, and somehow untouchable. "Is Kenny gone?" "Yeah. Finished installing his security system." Her expression flickered. Annoyance? Fear? It passed too quickly to read. "That seems excessive." He's worried. After the Marchetti piece, there were threats. "There are always threats, Todd. That's your life." She slid into bed beside him but didn't touch him. "Maybe it's time to worry less about old mob stories and more about enjoying your retirement." It wasn't the first time she'd suggested he abandon the book. In recent months, Christie had grown increasingly insistent that he let the past stay buried. She'd argued it was dangerous, unnecessary, obsessive. But Todd had built his career on refusing to let important stories die. "I'm close to finishing," he said. 6 more months, maybe less." She said nothing, just turned away and pulled the covers up. Todd returned to his manuscript, but his concentration had fractured. He found himself thinking about Kenny's urgency, Christie's coldness, the weight of unseen cameras recording every moment. At 2:47 a.m., he finally closed his laptop and drifted toward uneasy sleep, unaware that the cameras were already capturing the beginning of his nightmare. Chapter 2. The Call. The phone's shrill ring cut through Todd's sleep like a blade. He jolted awake, disoriented in the darkness. Beside him, Christie's side of the bed was empty, probably working late again, or so she'd claim. 3:14. AM glowed on his nightstand clock. The phone rang again. Kenny's name flashed on the screen. "Ken?" Todd's voice was thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" "Get out of the house now!" His son's voice was raw panic, breaking on the words. "Dad, please, just run!" Todd was already moving, his journalist's instincts overriding confusion. He grabbed his keys from the nightstand, his wallet, his phone. "Kenny, what's happening?" "No time! Just go! Get in your car and drive away. Now! Dad!" The urgency in his son's voice obliterated any remaining doubt. Todd ran down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, despite his age. His heart hammered against his ribs. Through the windows, the street was empty, dark except for the occasional streetlight. He burst through the front door into the cold November night, the concrete brutal against his bare feet. He'd run out in just pajama pants and a t-shirt, no coat, no shoes. His Mercedes sat in the driveway, and he threw himself into the driver's seat. "I'm in the car," he gasped into the phone. "Kenny, talk to me. What's happening?" "Drive to the 24-hour diner on Clark Street, the one we used to go to when you worked night investigations. I'm coming to meet you." "Is someone in the house? Should I call the police?" "No police. Not yet. Dad, just trust me, please." The line went dead. Todd's hands shook as he started the engine. In his rearview mirror, his house stood quiet, ordinary, revealing nothing. No flames, no intruders, no obvious threat. But Kenny had never been prone to panic, had never cried wolf. The drive to the diner took 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Todd's mind raced through possibilities. Marchetti retaliation, a break-in, something wrong with Sarah. His bare feet ached on the pedals, and the night air through his cracked window raised goosebumps on his arms. Murphy's diner sat like an oasis of fluorescent light on an otherwise dead street. Todd had spent countless nights here during investigations, drinking bitter coffee and interviewing reluctant sources in the back booths. He pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. Kenny's Honda was already there. Inside, Kenny sat in their old corner booth, his laptop open, his face pale and drawn. When he looked up at Todd, there were tears in his eyes. "Dad!" He stood, and Todd pulled him into a fierce embrace. "What the hell is going on?" Kenny gestured to the booth. "Sit. You need to see this." Todd slid into the worn vinyl seat across from his son. The diner was nearly empty, just a trucker at the counter, and a waitress who'd seen too many late nights to care about 2 more. Kenny turned the laptop around. The screen showed multiple camera feeds from Todd's house, each one time-stamped 2:34 a.m. Most rooms were dark and empty, but in the kitchen, two figures stood in what looked like intense conversation. Christy, in the same silk robe Todd had seen her wearing hours earlier, and a man Todd didn't recognize. Kenny clicked a key, and audio began to play. "Tomorrow night, then." The man's voice was rough, hard. "You're sure he'll drink it?" "He always has the scotch I pour him." Christy's voice, but colder than Todd had ever heard it. "After that, it's just a matter of hours. The doctors will call it a heart attack. Completely natural for a man his age, especially with his family history." Todd's blood froze. His father had died of a massive coronary at 57. It was in every medical record. The man on screen moved closer to Christy. In the night vision green of the camera, Todd could see his face clearly now. Angular features, a scar running down his left cheek. Roger Horn. Todd's mind provided the name instantly from his files. Roger Horn, enforcer for the Marchetti family, suspected in at least 8 murders but never convicted. "And the files?" Horn asked. "Vincent wants every copy of whatever Whitney has on the family, the ones he published and the ones he didn't." "He keeps everything in his office safe," Christy said. "I have the combination now. Once he's gone, I'll have time to get everything before anyone thinks to look." "Vincent's paying you well for this," Horn said. $500,000 plus whatever insurance money you get." Christy smiled, and it was nothing like the expression Todd had seen on their wedding day. "I earned it. 18 months pretending to love that sanctimonious old man. Do you know how many times I had to listen to his moral crusading? His stories about exposing corruption?" She laughed, bitter and sharp. "He never suspected a thing." Horn pulled her close, kissed her roughly. She kissed him back, her hands in his hair. Kenny stopped the video. Todd couldn't breathe. The diner's fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the coffee smell nauseating. His wife, the woman he'd trusted, married, let into every corner of his life, was planning to murder him. Had been playing him from the start. "There's more," Kenny said quietly. Hours of footage, her meeting with Horn multiple times, calls to Vincent Marchetti in prison. "Dad, she's been surveilling you, copying your files, planning this for months, maybe from the beginning." "How long have you known?" Todd's voice came out strangled. "I suspected something was wrong about 6 weeks ago. You started calling me, forgetting conversations we'd had. You seemed confused sometimes, tired. I thought maybe early dementia, but you're too young, too sharp. Then I thought about Christy, how she always poured your drinks, made your coffee." Kenny's jaw clenched. "I started researching. Low-dose poisoning can mimic age-related decline. I installed the cameras to see if I was crazy or if something was actually wrong. You could have told me. I needed proof. You loved her, Dad. You wouldn't have believed me without evidence." Todd stared at the frozen image on the screen. Christy in Horn's arms, both of them in his kitchen, in his home, plotting his murder. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. The instinct that had made him a legendary journalist, that had let him survive in the dangerous world of investigative reporting. The cold, calculating part of his mind that knew how to turn a story, how to catch the villain, how to make justice happen. "What's the plan?" he asked. Kenny blinked. "Plan? Dad, we need to call the police right now. Show them this footage. Get a protective order. Get her arrested." "No." Todd's voice was steel. "Not yet. Are you insane? She's trying to kill you. And right now she thinks she's succeeding." Todd's mind was already racing ahead, pieces falling into place. "They plan to make it look like natural causes. Heart attack, just like my father. No autopsy, no investigation. Just a grieving widow and a funeral. So we stop it by having her arrested." "On what charge? Conspiracy to commit murder based on surveillance footage that might not be admissible? Even if the DA prosecutes, a good lawyer could argue reasonable doubt. She never actually did anything yet. It's all just talk." Todd leaned forward. "But if we play this right, we can destroy both her and Horn. Get them caught in the act, with evidence that will put them away forever. This isn't a story you're investigating, Dad. This is your life. Exactly, and I'll be damned if I let them write the ending. Todd met his son's eyes. I need you to trust me, Ken. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how to catch the bad guys. Kenny studied his father's face, seeing the steel beneath the shock. Finally, he nodded. What do you need? First, we let them think I left the house because I was spooked. Saw a car outside, paranoia from the Marchetti threats. I'll go back in a few hours. Act like everything's normal. Second, I need you to make copies of all that footage. Store it somewhere safe. Multiple locations. Cloud, physical drives with your lawyer. Make it untouchable. Done. What else? Todd smiled, and it was nothing like the warm expression his children knew. It was the smile that had made corrupt politicians sweat during interviews, the look that had made mobsters nervous. Then we give them exactly what they want. We let them think they're winning, and when they're so confident they can't see the trap. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Chapter 3. The Performance. Todd returned home at 6 a.m., just as dawn broke over Chicago. He'd stopped at a 24-hour drugstore for shoes and a jacket, made himself look like he'd simply gone out for an early drive. When he pulled into the driveway, Christie's car was there. She'd come home while he was gone. He found her in the kitchen, making coffee. She turned when he entered, concern expertly painted across her features. Todd? Where were you? I woke up and you were gone. Couldn't sleep. He kept his voice normal, fought to meet her eyes without revealing what he knew. Thought I saw someone watching the house around 3. Probably nothing, just paranoia. But I drove around the block a few times. Stopped for coffee. Understanding and relief played across her face. Both fake, he now knew. You should have woken me. Didn't want to worry you. He accepted the coffee cup she offered, fighting revulsion at her touch. Probably just nerves. Kenny's security system has me jumping at shadows. She smiled, and he saw the calculation behind it. Well, you're safe. That's what matters. Todd spent the day performing normalcy. He worked on his manuscript, had lunch with Christie, discussed holiday plans. All the while, his mind raced through possibilities, strategies, the architecture of revenge. He'd spent 3 decades learning how criminals thought, how they operated, how they made mistakes. Now he would use all that knowledge against the woman who'd vowed to love him until death. That evening, Christie poured him his usual scotch. Macallan 18, neat, his after-dinner ritual. He took the glass, swirled it, brought it to his lips. Then, while she watched, he took a long drink. Perfect, he said. Thank you, sweetheart. Her smile was radiant. Of course. He didn't drink anymore. 30 minutes later, he excused himself to the bathroom and poured the scotch down the sink. The next night, he did the same. And the next. Kenny's cameras captured everything, Christie adding drops from a small vial into the scotch bottle, her phone conversations with Roger Horn, her growing confidence that the plan was working. He's definitely slowing down, she told Horn on the 4th night, standing in Todd's office while he supposedly slept upstairs. More tired, less focused. Another week, maybe 2, and we can finish this. Todd, listening to the recording Kenny sent him, smiled in the darkness of the guest room where he'd actually been sleeping. Not that Christie knew. He'd been setting his own surveillance, documenting everything, building a case that would destroy them both. But he needed more than just evidence of the poisoning attempt. He needed to catch them with the files they wanted, tie them directly to Vincent Marchetti, make the conspiracy irrefutable. On the 7th day, Todd made his move. I think I've been working too hard, he told Christie at breakfast. Maybe you were right about taking a break from the book. Her eyes lit up. Really? I'm taking the files to my safe deposit box downtown tomorrow. Get them out of the house, out of my mind for a while. Fresh start. It was a lie. Todd's real files were already secured with his attorney, copied and distributed. What Christie didn't know was that he'd prepared a completely Different set. Files that looked authentic, but contained tracking devices, hidden cameras, and most importantly, enough fabricated evidence to make Vincent Marchetti believe Todd had witnessed murders, recorded confessions, documented crimes that could reopen cases and destroy what was left of the Marchetti organization. "That's probably smart," Christie said carefully. "Clear your head. I'll do it tomorrow afternoon. Maybe afterward we could have dinner. Celebrate retirement for real? I'd love that." She kissed him, and Todd forced himself not to recoil. That night, Kenny called with new intelligence. "I've been monitoring Horn's phone through some contacts I have at the Bureau. His son had made detective 3 years ago, worked cybercrime. Horn's getting pressure from Marchetti. They want this done soon. And Dad, they know about your safe deposit box plan." "Of course they do. Christie probably told them the second I left the room. So they'll make their move tomorrow." "Exactly." Todd's voice was cold satisfaction. "I've set up a fake trip to the bank. I'll leave the house with a briefcase full of the prepared files. But I won't go to the bank. I'll go to a storage facility I rented under a shell company, the one place they're not monitoring." "And when they follow you?" "They'll see me put the files in storage unit 247. They'll think they know where everything is." Todd paused. "Then it's just a matter of catching them in the act. This is dangerous, Dad." "I've been in danger since I married her, Ken. At least now I'm the one controlling the game." Chapter 4. Bait and Switch. The next morning, Todd went through his act with precision. He packed his briefcase with the dummy files, each folder carefully prepared to look authentic. Christie watched from the kitchen doorway as he checked the locks on his office safe, the one that actually held nothing but old tax returns now. "Sure you don't want me to come with you?" she asked. "Bank's boring. I'll be back in a few hours, and we can plan that dinner." He kissed her cheek, felt her relax into the deception. She thought she was close to winning. They both thought they were. Todd drove his Mercedes toward downtown but took a detour at Roosevelt Road. In his rearview mirror he spotted the tail, a black SUV, 3 cars back. Roger Horn or one of his associates. Todd had been followed plenty of times during investigations. He knew how to spot surveillance. The storage facility was in an industrial area south of the Loop, sandwiched between warehouses and abandoned factories. Todd pulled into the parking lot, noting how the SUV stopped half a block away. He made a show of checking his surroundings, nervous, paranoid, before entering the building. Unit 247 was on the second floor. Todd had Kenny's cameras installed here too, hidden in the corners, recording everything. He opened the briefcase, stacked the files carefully on a metal shelf, then placed a small lockbox beside them, also fake, also filled with more bait. He lingered, checking his phone, giving them time to see where everything was stored. Then he locked the unit and left. The SUV followed him all the way home. That afternoon, Todd's phone rang. A blocked number. "Mr. Whitney." The voice was gravelly, old. Vincent Marchetti himself. "I understand you're having some health troubles. Shame about your heart condition. How did you get this number? I get whatever I want, even from prison." Marchetti laughed, the sound like stones grinding together. "Your wife sends her regards. Sweet girl, Christie. Very cooperative." Todd forced rage down, kept his voice steady. "What do you want?" "I want you dead, obviously. But more importantly, I want every file, every recording, every piece of evidence you have on my family. Christie tells me you've been writing a book. I want that manuscript. I want everything you've ever compiled about our operations. You'll never get it. I already know where it is. Storage Unit 247, South Industrial Drive. You really should be more careful with valuable property." Another laugh. "Here's how this goes. You're going to have a heart attack in the next few days. Very sad, very natural. And once you're gone, Christie will make sure I get those files. Consider it the price of your failure to mind your own business. You're threatening to kill me over a book? I'm promising to kill you. The book is just why." The line went dead. Todd sat in his home office, the recording device Kenny had given him capturing every word. Vincent Marchetti had just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder, made terroristic threats, all from inside a federal prison. That alone would add years to his sentence. But Todd wanted more. He wanted all of them. That night, he told Christy about the call. Her concern was Academy Award worthy. "We should go to the police," she said. "Get protection. And tell them what? That a man I helped put in prison is mad at me? They can't do anything without evidence of an actual threat. He threatened to kill you. It's my word against his. He'll say I made it up for attention, for publicity for my book." Todd rubbed his face, played exhausted, defeated. Maybe I should just give him what he wants. Destroy the files, forget the book. It's not worth dying over. He saw hope flare in her eyes. "You'd really do that?" "I'm tired, Christy. Tired of fighting. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Maybe it's time to let the past stay buried." She hugged him, and he smelled her perfume mixed with lies. "That's the right choice," she whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." That night, Todd didn't sleep. He sat in the guest room with Kenny on video call, reviewing their plan. "The storage unit cameras are live," Kenny confirmed. "I've also got traffic cameras on the surrounding streets, thanks to a friendly contact at the city. When they make their move, we'll have everything documented." "What about the FBI?" "Agent Leonard Lyons owes you from that corruption story you broke. I briefed him on everything. He's got a team ready to move when we give the signal." "But Dad," Kenny hesitated. "Are you sure about being there? You're the target. If something goes wrong..." "They're not going to kill me in the storage facility. Too public, too messy. They just want the files. I need to be there to make sure they take the bait, to record their confessions. This ends tomorrow, Ken. One way or another." Chapter 5. The Web Tightens. The next day unfolded like the calm before a storm. Todd spent the morning at home, working on his fake manuscript, pages of fabricated evidence that would terrify Marchetti but wouldn't actually hold up in court. He needed Christy to believe he was legitimately scared, ready to surrender. Around noon, Christy went out. "Errands," she said. Kenny's surveillance showed her meeting Roger Horn in the parking lot of an abandoned shopping center on the south side. The camera footage was grainy, but audio was clear enough. "He's giving up," Christy said. "He told me last night he's going to destroy everything. We need to move now, get those files before he actually does it." Horn lit a cigarette, his scarred face impassive. "Vincent wants to be sure. The old man's smart. This could be a trap." "It's not a trap. He's broken. You broke him." Christy's voice carried satisfaction. "Tonight, while he's sleeping. I'll slip him enough sedative to keep him out for hours. You go to the storage unit, get everything. By morning, we finish him. Heart attack. Tragic. Unexpected. I'll be a widow with $500,000 and no one will ever know. You better be right about this." "I am. Todd Whitney thinks he's the smartest man in the room, but he never saw me coming. He never suspected a thing." Kenny sent the recording to Todd within minutes. "They're going tonight. Are you sure you want to do this?" "Set it up," Todd replied. "Lyons and his team need to be in position by 10 p.m. I'll be at the storage unit by 11. This ends tonight." Todd spent the afternoon gathering what he needed, a recording device so small it fit in his shirt button, courtesy of an old CIA source who'd helped him on previous investigations. His concealed carry permit was current, his Glock 19 cleaned and loaded, though he hoped it wouldn't come to that. This was about justice, not revenge, about catching them legally, irrefutably. At dinner, Christy was warm, attentive, perfect. She poured his scotch. He pretended to drink it. She made his coffee. He dumped it in the sink. When she offered him a sleep aid to help with your stress, he palmed it and flushed it later. At 9:30 p.m., he pretended to go to bed. Christy waited until 10 us, then he heard her on the phone. "He's out. Get the files. I'll wait for your call." Todd waited in the darkness of the guest room until 10:30, then slipped out through the basement door Kenny had left unlocked days earlier. His car was parked 2 streets over, keys in the ignition. He drove through the cold November night toward the storage facility, toward the endgame. Agent Lyons and his team were already in position. FBI surveillance van parked in an adjacent warehouse. Todd met them in the shadows. "You're sure they're coming?" Lyons asked. He was 50, gray at the temples, sharp-eyed. They'd worked together on the pharmaceutical expose that had won Todd his Pulitzer. "They're coming. Horn wants those files for Marchetti. He'll be here by midnight. And you need to be inside because they need to tell me themselves what they're doing and why. I need their confession on record, not just theft. This is about more than stealing documents. It's conspiracy to murder, criminal organization, everything." Lyons didn't look happy, but he nodded. "You've got 20 minutes inside before my team moves. Any sign of violence? Any threat? We're breaching immediately. Clear?" "Clear." Todd entered the storage facility at 11:45 p.m. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Unit 247 was locked just as he'd left it. He opened it, stepped inside, and waited in the corner where the cameras couldn't see him but where he'd have a clear view of anyone who entered. At 11:58, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Roger Horn entered first, crowbar in hand, ready to break the lock. Behind him came two other men Todd recognized from his files, Carl LeBlanc and Saul Moss, both Marchetti enforcers. But it was the fourth person who made Todd's blood run cold, Brian Dunbar, his editor from the newspaper, the man he'd trusted for 15 years. "Make it quick," Dunbar said, his voice nervous. "If Whitney somehow knows—" "Whitney doesn't know anything," Horn interrupted. "He's drugged out in his bed right now, probably dreaming about his precious principles." He jimmied the lock open and they filed into the storage unit. Todd's recording device captured everything. "All the files are here," LeBlanc said, rifling through the folders. "Christ, he's got documentation going back 30 years. Murders, money laundering, the whole operation." "Grab it all," Horn ordered. "Marchetti wants everything burned." "And Whitney?" Moss asked. "Dead by morning. Christie's handling it. Little wife's been feeding him poison for weeks. Tonight's the final dose. He'll never wake up." Horn smiled. "And the best part? No one will ever know. Heart attack, natural causes. By the time anyone thinks to investigate, Christie will have cleaned out everything." "What about the son?" Dunbar asked. "Kenny's suspicious. He's been asking questions around the newsroom. Kenny will find his father dead and his stepmother grieving. Nothing to suspect." Horn pulled out his phone. "I'm texting Christie now. Tell her we have the files. Tell her to finish the job." That's when Todd stepped out of the shadows. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." All four men spun around. Horn's hand went to his belt, where a gun was holstered. LeBlanc and Moss both reached for their weapons. But Todd was already holding his Glock, steady, aimed at Horn's center mass. "Nobody move. FBI is surrounding this building right now, listening to every word you've said." "You're bluffing," Horn snarled. "Am I?" Todd smiled coldly. "Agent Lyons, would you like to confirm?" The storage unit door burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Horn and his men were on the ground in seconds, cuffed, their protests meaningless against the weight of recorded confessions and federal warrants. Agent Lyons approached Todd, shook his hand. "Hell of a performance, Whitney. Is Christie?" "Team's picking her up right now. We've got warrants for her, Horn, Marchetti for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, the works. And Dunbar—" He looked at the editor with disgust. "How long have you been on Marchetti's payroll?" Dunbar said nothing, his face gray. Todd felt the adrenaline finally crash, exhaustion and relief flooding through him. "It's over." "Not quite," Lyons said. "We still need your testimony, all of it. But yeah, the main event is over. You got them, Todd. You got all of them." Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The arrests made national news. "Journalist exposes murder plot against himself," read the Tribune headline. Within hours, the story had spread. Cable news, internet, even international coverage. Todd Whitney, the legendary investigative reporter, had turned his own attempted murder into the story of the decade. But Todd wasn't interested in the publicity. He was in Kenny's apartment, watching Christie's arraignment on television. She looked different in the orange jumpsuit, smaller, defeated, all her polish stripped away. Her attorney was arguing for bail, claiming she was no flight risk, that the charges were based on circumstantial evidence. "Your Honor," the prosecutor countered, "Ms. Maloney Whitney is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and racketeering. We have video and audio evidence of her poisoning her husband repeatedly over 6 weeks, planning his death with known organized crime figures, and actively working to steal documents on behalf of Vincent Marchetti, a convicted mob boss. She is absolutely a flight risk." Bail was denied. Todd turned off the TV. Kenny sat beside him, Sarah on video call from Boston, both of them watching their father with concern. "How are you really doing, Dad?" Sarah asked, her pediatrician's voice gentle but probing. "Honestly, I don't know yet." Todd rubbed his face. He'd barely slept in days. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. The way she always offered to make my coffee, pour my drinks, how she'd push me to abandon the book, the coldness that I attributed to stress. She was a con artist, Dad," Kenny said firmly. "A professional. You're not the first smart person to be fooled by someone pretending to love them. But I built a career on reading people, on seeing through lies." "In stories," Sarah interjected. "But this was your life. You wanted to believe someone could love you after Mom. That's not weakness. That's being human." Maybe they were right, but the betrayal still cut deep, deeper than the fear had. Over the next week, the case against Christy Horn and the others solidified into something unbreakable. The cameras had captured everything: the poisoning, the planning, the confessions. Vincent Marchetti's phone calls from prison added federal charges. Brian Dunbar, Todd's editor, had been feeding information to the Marchettis for over a year, compromising investigations, protecting criminals. His betrayal somehow hurt almost as much as Christie's. But the files Todd had prepared, the fake evidence in the storage unit, had worked perfectly. When Horn and his team had grabbed them, they'd triggered GPS trackers, activated hidden cameras, created a digital trail that tied them irrefutably to the conspiracy. Everything had gone according to plan. Well, almost everything. "There's something you should know," Agent Lyons said during one of his debriefing sessions with Todd. "When we arrested Christie, she tried to make a deal, offered to testify against Marchetti in exchange for reduced charges. What did you tell her? That we don't need her testimony. We have recordings of everything. Her cooperation is worthless." Lyons leaned back in his chair. "She really thought she was smarter than you. Thought she'd played the perfect game. She almost did. If Kenny hadn't suspected something, if he hadn't installed those cameras." Todd didn't finish the thought. "But he did. And you turned a murder plot into evidence that'll put multiple criminals away for decades. That's some impressive work, Whitney." Todd didn't feel impressive. He felt tired, betrayed, older than his 53 years. But he also felt alive in a way he hadn't for months. The fog that had been creeping over his mind, the confusion, the fatigue, had lifted once he stopped drinking the poisoned scotch. Christie had been slowly killing him, and he'd been so trusting he'd never questioned why he felt so ill. Never again. Chapter 7. The Trial. 3 months later, Todd sat in the federal courthouse, preparing to testify. The prosecution had built an airtight case, but they wanted the jury to hear from Todd himself. The victim who'd turned hunter, the man who'd outsmarted his would-be killers. Christie's trial was first. She sat at the defense table in a modest blue dress, her hair pulled back, makeup subtle. Her attorney had tried to paint her as a victim herself, coerced by Horn, manipulated by Marchetti, in fear for her life. But the prosecution had the recordings, the video footage, evidence of bank accounts in the Cayman Islands where her payment was waiting. When Todd took the stand, their eyes met across the courtroom. He saw hatred there, and fear, and the death of any mask she'd once worn. "Mr. Whitney," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the jury how you met the defendant?" Todd recounted their meeting, the courtship, the marriage, how she'd seemed perfect, understanding, supportive, How he'd never suspected that every kindness was calculation, every smile a lie. When did you first become aware that Ms. Maloney Whitney was attempting to kill you? When my son called me at 3:14 a.m. on November 10th, telling me to run from my own house. The prosecutor played the audio recording of that call. Kenny's panicked voice, Todd's confusion, the terror in both. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably. And what did you discover? Todd walked them through it, the surveillance footage of Christie and Horn in his kitchen, the plan to poison him and steal his files, the conspiracy with the Marchetti family. He showed no emotion, just facts, dates, evidence. But inside, the wound was still raw. Mr. Whitney, why didn't you go to the police immediately? Because I wanted to catch all of them. Not just my wife, but Roger Horn, the Marchetti organization, everyone involved in the conspiracy. I wanted justice that would actually stick. He looked at the jury. I've been an investigative journalist for 30 years. I know how criminals escape on technicalities, how evidence gets thrown out, how the system can fail. I wasn't going to let that happen here. Christie's attorney cross-examined him, trying to poke holes in his story, suggesting he'd fabricated evidence, that his journalistic methods had been unethical. But every question had an answer. Every accusation had a recording to refute it. Isn't it true, Mr. Whitney, that you set up an elaborate trap, essentially entrapping my client? I gave your client every opportunity to not commit crimes. She chose to poison me, chose to conspire with criminals, chose to steal files. All I did was document her choices. The attorney tried a different approach. You recorded private conversations, surveilled your own home. That's not the behavior of an innocent man. It's the behavior of a man trying to stay alive. Todd's voice hardened. Your client was killing me slowly, planning to make it look natural. What would you have done in my position? Wait to die? The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, racketeering, theft. Christie Maloney Whitney was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 15. When the verdict was read, she broke down sobbing. Todd felt nothing but relief. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Roger Horn's trial was shorter, but more dramatic. Unlike Christie, he had a long criminal history. The recordings from the storage unit, combined with his prior arrests, painted a picture of a career criminal finally caught in an inescapable trap. You set me up, Horn snarled at Todd during a recess, his attorney trying to pull him away. You think you're so smart playing detective? You're just a reporter who got lucky. I'm a reporter who's still alive, Todd replied calmly. You're the one going to prison. Horn's trial included testimony from Agent Lyons about the FBI's investigation into the Marchetti family, how Horn had been their primary enforcer for years. The dummy files from the storage unit were entered as evidence, not of their content, but of Horn's intent to steal them. The GPS trackers, the hidden cameras, everything that had documented his crimes. Horn was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, theft, and 12 other charges related to his work for the Marchettis, 40 years to life. Carl LeBlanc and Saul Moss took plea deals, 20 years each in exchange for testimony against the organization. Brian Dunbar, the editor who'd betrayed Todd's trust, was the hardest to watch. They'd worked together for 15 years. Dunbar had been at Todd's first wedding, had held Sarah when she was a baby, and he'd sold out to the Marchettis for what? $200,000 and the promise of more. Why? Todd asked him during a private meeting before sentencing, against his attorney's advice. Dunbar looked smaller than Todd remembered, diminished by his choices. They approached me 5 years ago, said they'd kill my daughter if I didn't cooperate, feed them information, warn them when you were getting close to publishing something dangerous. I thought I was protecting her. You could have told me. I would have helped. You don't help, Todd. You investigate. You expose. You turn everything into a story. Dunbar's voice was bitter. I couldn't risk it. So I became their informant. And when they wanted you dead, when Christie came to me asking which files you had, where you kept them, I was already so deep I couldn't see a way out. There's always a way out. You just have to be brave enough to take it, Dunbar laughed, hollow. Says the man who's never been afraid. I've been terrified. I was terrified the night Kenny called. I was terrified every moment I pretended to still trust Christy, knowing she was poisoning me. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. But Dunbar was past listening. He was sentenced to 15 years for racketeering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The legendary career at the Tribune was over, his reputation destroyed. Chapter 9. The Victory. 6 months after the arrests, Todd sat in his new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. He'd sold the house, couldn't bear to live in the place where Christy had poisoned him, where cameras had recorded his near murder. This space was clean, uncontaminated by betrayal. His book sat on the desk, finally complete. The Marchetti Legacy, 3 decades of Chicago's hidden war, was set to publish in 3 months. But this version didn't include his personal story that he was saving for a different book, one about betrayal and survival, and the thin line between journalism and justice. Kenny visited weekly. Sarah called every few days. They'd grown closer through this nightmare, bound by the shared knowledge of how close they'd come to losing each other. "You did it, Dad," Kenny said one afternoon, watching boats cut across the lake. "You took them all down." "We did it," Todd corrected. "If you hadn't trusted your instincts, if you hadn't installed those cameras, I'd be dead, and they'd all be free. But you're the one who turned it into a trap. You're the one who made them confess everything. That was all you." Todd considered this. The plan had been risky, dependent on reading his enemies correctly, on predicting their moves. If he'd been wrong at any step, if Horn had decided to kill him in the storage unit, if Christy had discovered the surveillance, if Marchetti had changed the plan, it could have ended very differently, but it hadn't. He'd won because he'd been smarter, more patient, more ruthless when it mattered. He'd used every skill honed over 30 years of investigations, every lesson learned from documenting criminals. He'd beaten them at their own game. "How does it feel?" Sarah asked during their weekly video call. "Knowing you're safe now? That they're all in prison?" "Honestly, I'm still processing it. I wake up sometimes and reach for my phone to check the cameras, forgetting they're not needed anymore. I make my own coffee now, pour my own drinks, and I still find myself checking for sediment, for anything off." He paused. "Trust is hard to rebuild, even trust in yourself." "You'll get there, Dad. You're the strongest person I know." Todd wasn't sure about that, but he was surviving. He was writing. He was learning to live without fear, without cameras, without wondering if the person closest to him was planning his death. Agent Lyons called in July with the final update. "Vincent Marchetti's been indicted on new charges based on the evidence you provided, the recordings of his phone calls, the documentation of his orders. Combined with what we already had, he's looking at spending the rest of his life in prison. The family's essentially destroyed." "Good. You know, Whitney, the Bureau could use someone with your skills. Consulting work, helping us on organized crime investigations. Interested?" Todd considered it. Part of him wanted nothing more than to disappear into quiet retirement, write his books, spend time with his children. But another part, the part that had driven him through 3 decades of dangerous journalism, wasn't ready to stop fighting. "Let me think about it," he said. But he already knew his answer. A week later, Todd stood at the lectern of Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, addressing a class of eager students about investigative reporting. He told them about the importance of documentation, of building unshakable evidence, of pursuing truth even when it was dangerous. He didn't tell them about Christy, about nearly dying in his own home. That story wasn't theirs yet. But someday, when the book was published, when enough time had passed, he'd tell them how the most important investigation of his life had been the one that saved it. After the lecture, a young woman approached him. "Mr. Whitney, I've read all your work. You're the reason I want to be an investigative journalist." "Then learn to trust your instincts," Todd said. "Question everything, document everything, and never, ever assume you're safe just because you're comfortable." She nodded earnestly, not understanding the weight behind his words. How could she? She'd never been betrayed by someone she loved, never had to turn her own life into evidence, never had to choose between running and fighting. Todd hoped she never would. That night, alone in his apartment, he poured himself a scotch, Macallan 18, the same brand Christie had poisoned. He'd thought about switching brands, about never drinking it again. But that would be letting her win in some small way. So he poured it himself, checked it carefully by habit, and raised the glass to the window. To survival, he said quietly. Outside, Chicago glittered in the darkness, full of stories waiting to be uncovered, truths waiting to be exposed, justice waiting to be served. Todd Whitney had spent 30 years chasing those stories. He'd nearly died for them, but he was still here, still fighting, still winning. And that was victory enough.
And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.